Greetings and welcome to the Modern Alchemist channel. I'm Aubrey Forrest, the Modern Alchemist, and this is Alchemy Journal. Today on Alchemy Journal, we're going to be talking about Stranger Things and the importance of popular culture and playing games. Are you ready? Let's begin. So unless you've been living under a rock for the last couple weeks, you probably either have seen Stranger Things, have heard about it, or know a friend who's just absolutely crazy about Stranger Things because it's awesome. So if you haven't seen it, or if you don't have Netflix, I would recommend giving it a shot, at least borrowing a friend's password or something and watching it or binge watching it with them. It really is outstanding. And not just simply because of how it handles the subject matter, but the way it presents it. There's several subtexts, especially in the current season, but in season 1 as well, that are relevant for our discussion right here. And I'm not going to have any spoilers here. We're not going to sit there and talk about plot points. Instead, what I want to do is talk about something that Stranger Things builds into itself, into the story, that makes it so successful. What is it? What is this thing that they do? It's reliance upon popular culture and games as a means of facilitating a language whereby events which were outside of the normal bounds of conventional reality can then be described into terms which are understandable, which allow you to define it and enclose it within a sphere of understanding relative to a previous experience. Now, this experience can be done vicariously, like going to the movies. It can be done through reading, like reading comic books or novels, fantasy or science fiction. Or it can be experienced through sophisticated games like Dungeons and Dragons, or any other fantasy role-playing game, and even a lot of the games that you can play online, like World of Warcraft. With regard to World of Warcraft, there's an entire narrative structure there, so that if I mention a particular character, like Arthas, those of you out there in the game who understand that narrative understand that it ties to a whole body of work called Wrath of the Lich King, and that extends into a larger scope and narrative, and that we could have an entire dialogue about it. A similar thing would be Game of Thrones, where you have this established literature, both on video and in text, where you can discuss the interaction of certain characters and draw parallels between those interactions and things that you might be seeing in front of you right now. That's the importance of pop culture. I've talked about it in other episodes. In Essentials of Practical Alchemy in 2015, I talked about Darmok and Star Trek Season 5, Episode 2, where you have a group of people who encounter another group of people who have a unique narrative. And that narrative structure is so heavily embedded into their language that when they speak in abbreviated references to those narratives. And you're welcome to check out those videos, they're still pretty good. So I'm really happy with them. But that brings you to this idea. The beauty of gaming, the beauty of tabletop gaming, is that the rule structure provide real boundaries that often, if it's a really good game, have physical correspondences, so that you can look at a person and gauge what the average strength potential of that person might be, or their dexterity potential, and that you can then communicate that in other terms. Now, I probably lost some of you guys out there just by talking about this, because it is an entire level of understanding that exists that provides and facilitates greater language. And I've found, as I've gone through and taught this esoteric material for years, that the students that have the greatest degree of success are the ones that have a developed sense of pop culture. So, for instance, if I relate to you something associated with what I call a pattern, which is a sequence of events, which then mythologies describe each of these events, and you sort them out. And the sorting mechanism is an understanding of the electric universe. If I take these really complex ideas and then I relate them to a narrative like Thor Ragnarok, and I say the Hulk is to Jupiter as a luminary body, green and powerful, and Thor is as to Mars, the planetary body that we see today, desolate and wasted. You gain a sense of, I can then begin to describe stuff to you. And that Hela in that show represents Saturn as a feminine receptive influence. Norse mythology is really great for understanding electric universe dynamics between astrotheological bodies. So, and watching their interplay between each other. So if I wanted to relate those to you and you hadn't seen the movie yet, now it's not out yet, but that's a hint. Anyway, if you haven't seen the movie yet, you won't be able to understand some of these interactions. Whereas if you are familiar with characters like the Hulk and Thor and perhaps the Marvel Universe or the DC Universe, that gives me an additional inroad. It gives me just one more plank, one more foundation upon which I can help build increased understanding. Because the people who are writing these stories are writing it from a foundation of that understanding. That's why it's so easy to teach those principles by referencing those stories. Because the people who are writing those stories have an understanding of these principles. Make sense? So, Stranger Things brings this really to a head, so that in this first season, the kids, when they encounter this stuff, and it's crazy and it's scary, they relate it to a thing that they encountered in Dungeons and Dragons, the Demigorgon. And for the rest of the first season, that little character, the little icon, the Demigorgon, is representative then of that big bad. The kids are able to dialogue among themselves with regard to the girl, 11, and they relate her abilities to the X-Men because they have a similar narrative. They tie other characters and perhaps their duplicity to characters like Lando Calrissian in Star Wars. And all of this is a shortcutting mechanism so that when the kids keep encountering all this stuff, they're able to communicate effectively among themselves as to what's going on and what they should do because they have this foundation. The adults in the show are crippled because they have no foundation. They have absolutely no understanding of popular culture. They have absolutely no understanding of things which can be experienced outside the bounds of regular reality. And so they have no vocabulary to describe what they're experiencing. And this is really brought to the fore with Winona Ryder, who's just a freaking basket case in season 1. I mean, she loses her shit. And it's amazing to watch her do it and try to describe it. And to anyone who's an adult who has no foundation in any of this understanding, she seems like a Looney Tune. I mean, she has just lost her crackers. And yet, the children are experiencing all the same stuff, and they're able to handle it. And the thing that distinguishes the two, they're the language with which they're able to describe their experience. And that's the point. That's the point. The more that you learn, the more that you understand, and it's not just popular culture, the greater your depth of understanding in the sciences, the greater your depth of understanding in the mythological narratives, the greater your depth of understanding in the electric universe and how these dynamics play together, and the greater your understanding of the narratives that we use to describe to each other older stories or current stories or current experiences, the more adept you will become in handling all of the stuff that I'm trying to relate to you. All right, so that's it. That's what we wanted to talk about today, and we've done it, and we're all finished. Stranger Things is an excellent show, and it, as I said, it's worth watching, if only just to gain these ideas and see them play out. but also because there are other things which are at play in that show. Other things that I definitely will talk about later. For instance, the experience of astral projection, and how that's expressed within the show. But that's for another time. Until then, I'm Aubrey Forrest, the Modern Alchemist, and this has been an episode of Alchemy Journal. I'll be talking to you soon.